Hi, welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan. What an absolute delight it is to welcome Robert J. Sawyer today to our show. Robert's work has been nominated for about every speculative fiction award out there, and a few of his wins include the Nebula, the Hugo, and the Aurora. On top of his incredibly prolific writing career, Robert is known and sought out as a keynote speaker, and I have to say he's just an fascinating, incredible thinker. So welcome.
I'm
Welcome.
delighted to be here. Thank you.
So
Yay.
happy to have you.
Well, when people found out we were interviewing you, we were just bombarded by questions.
Oh,
Never
good.
seen anything like it. But in looking at some of your works and how you write, what we were most fascinated with is you say you choose a topic and then you go for the theme and then you research it and the story sort of comes after it. So I'd like to know, for instance, do you think of a theme like a scientific proposal and you know where you're going to go and you know what you want to prove, or do you fool yourself by what you discover?
There's a section above theme that's first is topic. So you have to decide what topic you're going to explore. And to give an example, I have a novel called Quantum Night, and I'm generally known until quite recently as an optimistic writer and an optimistic person. The events of the last 3 or 4 years have taken some of the bloom off that optimism. But leading up to that, certainly through my first novel, starting in 1990, through the mid 20-teens, reviewers were saying, you know, that Sawyer guy, he is so optimistic, it's almost Pollyanna-ish. There might even be a naivety, or maybe it's just his generic Canadian being nice quality about it. But he hasn't really engaged with the evil part of the human condition. So there's my topic, say, for Quantum Night. Evil. Well, I'm a science fiction writer, so it's obviously the science of evil. So the first thing I do is, as any researcher does these days, of course, back in the day when I started, you had to go to the library and hit the books and whatever. But these days, you simply go to Google and put in, what is the science of evil? And the word psychopathy, the study of psychopaths, comes up instantaneously. So reading up on this, and in particular, reading up on psychopathy, led me to my theme. It's a very famous case in American jurisprudence called Leopold and Loeb. And that case was a case of two young psychopaths who decided for kicks to kill an even younger boy. And Clarence Darrow, the great American litigator, or the great American defense attorney, excuse me, was hired by their parents to be the lead. And he said, it was a death penalty case. He said to the court, to the jury, you cannot execute these people because of the way they were born. And they were born without conscience. You can no more execute them for having no conscience than you can execute them for being men, or being white, or being tall, or being short. These are immutable human characteristics, and it would be a miscarriage of justice to execute them for simply being the way, quote unquote, God made him. Well, this led me to my theme, which is, although Darrow got what he wanted, which there was no way they were going to go free, but he got them to not face the death penalty. He got them instead sent to prison, which was all their parents, and indeed they themselves, could hope for. But it's also, I came to realize, there's my theme, the most pernicious lie the human race has ever told itself is that you can't change human nature. If you buy into that and you say, bad people are going to be bad people, we just got to accept them. Good people are going to be good, but ineffectual. We just have to accept that. We're doomed. And so I decided to take as my theme, you can change human nature. Well, this is a science fiction novel, and everything devolves from that. You have an invention that literally allows my main character to change people who were psychopathic into being people who have conscience, and vice versa. The whole novel devolves from topic, evil, question, because I'm a science fiction writer, what is the science of evil? Theme, oh, wait a minute, people are saying these guys are unchangeable. I think that is a lie. Let's explore that. Topic, theme, And then my proposition, which, okay, what characters am I going to explore? How am I going to develop a book based on that? In the case of Quantum Night, I have a man who discovers when he is being an expert witness, he's a psychologist on the witness stand and is being grilled about, supposedly he's going to give exonerating testimony for some prison guards who have done horrific things, that he himself has a blank period in his past that he can't account for. Wasn't conscious that he had lost track of some time when he was a grad student, and the evidence begins to accumulate that he himself had done horrible things during that time. So everything, topic, theme, and then what characters can you build to explore that theme? For me, this has been, I'm 25 novels in now, working on my 26 as we talk. This has been an ironclad structural method for me. I don't say it's the way every writer should do it. By no means. There are writers who are character first, situation first, some scientific trick that has no particular human ramification of how you're going to get faster light travel, how you're going to terraform Mars or whatever. These are all fine methods. I never say there is one way to do it. All I can ever say is, this is my way, and that's what it is.
So, Robert, does it ever surprise you? Do the characters or themes ever take you in a direction that surprises you? Like you think you're going to prove one thing, and then as you're getting into it, it takes you a different direction and you prove a different thing, or you prove yourself
The
wrong.
research, the whole thing, I think, is I'm very leery of ideologues. Whenever a conversation begins, I know I have a very authoritative way of speaking. I'm a trained broadcaster. My father and mother were both university professors. I can't help this didactic and sounds like I'm sure about everything tone of voice I have. I am unsure about everything. I am absolutely constantly changing my mind about moral and ethical conundra. About scientific issues. So am I surprised? I'm delighted when I go in with any sort of preconception. The key thing, though, is to try to be devoid of that. Another novel I wrote, I know it's one that your colleague Melody Friedenthal quite likes, because there's a very strong component about the Jewish experience during and after World War II, is my novel Frame Shift. And in that, the topic was genetics. That's all I knew. So I wanted to do a book about genetics. Started doing the research, and I came to a conclusion that I think has been blindingly obvious to us Canadians for a long time, but is still a hard sell in the United States, which is this. In the era of predictive genetic testing, which when I wrote that novel in the early 90s, it came out in 1997, was still sort of just nascent science, but now is it's $50 to get your DNA read by 23andMe or Ancestry.com. In the age of predictive genetic testing, the only thing that makes sense is socialized medicine. So I went from a topic of genetics to exploring, I don't know what I want to say about genetics. So what I came to realize was, the insurance industry makes 0 sense in the age of reading your DNA, because I know for a fact that I do not have the common DNA markers for Alzheimer's disease. So by all means, you will sell me an insurance policy against Alzheimer's. On the other hand, I know for a fact that I have all the common genetic markers for adult onset diabetes. And indeed, my family has been plagued by that. I don't have it, but you're not going to sell me insurance against diabetes. It's not a good bet for you. So once you start saying, well, I'll only insure you for the things you're not going to get, then insurance is meaningless unless it's socialized. Everybody is insured for everything out of the common funds of the community. So again, a very socially conscious science fiction in both these cases, Quantum Night and Frame Shift, and indeed most of my books. But it starts with tabula rasa, except for the topic, and the research reads to it. I honestly believed, before I really got into it, that Clarence Darrow, for instance, was right, that psychopathy, you're stuck with it. You either do have a conscience or you don't. And our world is unfortunately run by a lot of people who don't, and a lot of us poor people underneath who wish they did. But people can come to see the light. And in
What
fact,
changed,
this
right, just ask you what
reflected,
changed your mind about that?
beg pardon? What
Can I just
changed my mind about it? I
yeah.
think a few epiphanies in my own life, but it was actually, I was starting around that time to get interested in Oppenheimer. Um, and Oppenheimer, and I don't think Christopher Nolan did a decent job of this at all in the film. I'm a Barbie fan, not an Oppenheimer fan, despite the fact that I should be by all, demographics and by what I've written and never played with a Barbie in my life, should have been on Team Oppie. But I'm in Team Barbie because Oppenheimer missed, I think, catastrophically and as an abrogation of his moral responsibility. If he was going to dig into a story about the atomic bomb, Elizabeth asked, what changed my mind about the immutability of human nature? At the time I was starting to write or working on Quantum Night, I was also starting to really delve into J. Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. And I am, you would think I might be on Team Oppie in the Academy Awards, but I'm on Team Barbie. I think Christopher Nolan did a huge disservice when he glossed over the real change of heart and personality that J. Robert Oppenheimer had because of his involvement with the Manhattan Project. Oppie was absolutely the loyal American who said, well, you want me to make an atomic bomb? Remember, this is the big intellectual conundrum or crisis of conscience for the whole human race. As I often say, if the smartest people in the world would refuse to make the things the dumbest people in the world want them to make, the world would be a much better place. It's not the people who want chemical, biological, nuclear weapons who can make them. It's the scientists, the chemists, the engineers who are much brighter than those people who have to come on board and check their conscience at the door to do it. Well, Oppie was all aboard with that. Oh, you want a device that can kill tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people? Sure. He called it a sweet problem, and he pursued it as a sweet problem in physics. And indeed, he was all on board right through the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. He had a huge change of heart in a 72-hour period between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Maybe, you can argue this all kinds of ways. I have my own opinion, people have others. It was or was not necessary to bomb Hiroshima to bring the war to an end. There's absolutely no question that Nagasaki was, the term didn't even exist until Nagasaki, overkill. There was no need to do it. We had destroyed Hiroshima and destroyed the telegraph lines, destroyed the railway lines out. There was no way for word to instantly reach the high command in Tokyo that this thing had happened. There was no time for the high command in Tokyo to reflect and understand that this weapon had been used before the second one was dropped. And it was dropped solely because General Leslie R. Groves, a man whose conscience, I would say, never changed, felt that he had to test in real world conditions the two competing styles of atomic bomb, the fat man and the little boy, the uranium gun, which is the little boy, and the nuclear implosion, the implosion bomb, which is fat man. He wanted to see which one was more devastating. And the people in Nagasaki died just so that a warmonger could flex his muscles and help show to show the Soviets, they weren't caring about the Japanese at this point, to show the Soviets who was going to be in charge in the post-World War II world. Oppie had this huge change of heart. He changed completely and became a peace and disarmament advocate. So that's where it came from. In that absolute life story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, I realized that human nature can change. In fact, the only potential salvation for us as a people and a race is that human nature can change.
Do you think that Oppenheimer, do you think Oppenheimer had a moral code before and a sense of empathy before?
No, he was probably, we would diagnose him today as on the spectrum, and being very difficult at relating to people. He was also, you know, he's the guy, and Nolan fictionalizes it and glosses over it and doesn't really deal with it properly, I think, in the film. But Oppenheimer almost certainly tried to kill his tutor, Blackett, at the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge University, and only got out of a murder rap because his father, Julius Oppenheimer, happened to be a very rich man and bribed Cambridge with a whole bunch of European master paintings, which is what he collected from his collection. He was in there meeting with the president of Oxford and said, you know, Vermeer would look really nice above your fireplace. Wouldn't it be great to have a Rembrandt over there? And they dropped the charges on condition that Oppenheimer enter psychotherapy. And he actually entered psychotherapy almost certainly with a disciple of Freud, the first major English-speaking disciple of Freud. But no, he was quite content. We don't want to go too deep in Oppenheimer.
Yeah. But that's
almost
interesting.
certainly bisexual, if not out and totally not out at all, but not completely homosexual. Bisexual, was in love with Blackett. Blackett spurned him. There was no way to easily deal with this stuff at that time in the first half of the 20th century, and he kind of went nuts with it. So, you know, yeah, but no, he didn't show any empathy. When his daughter was born, he tried to give her away to his friends who had the next door place at Los Alamos. I can't love her. I'm not capable. I'm not the attachment kind. And he's like many people, many idealists who say, I love humanity. It's people I can't stand. I think Oppenheimer was very much one of those.
Interesting.
But do you think those two boys you talked about who plotted to kill the young, do you think somebody like that, Jeffrey Dahmer, whatever, can have a change of heart as well?
One of the two did in prison. One of the two reformed and eventually was released from prison. So the answer is even there, yes. I think, you know, that not everybody, for sure, not everybody can have a change of heart. There are physiological difficulties, you know, with people who have brain damage, and there are those who argue that psychopathy is a particular form of brain damage. You can't just will yourself to overcome brain damage any more than you can will yourself to no longer have atrial, you know, fibrillation. You can hope for the best, but you can't change that. But for most people, we use terms in genetics of phenotype and genotype. Genotype is what your genes say your range of possibilities are. Phenotype is how you actually express them. So I have the genes for diabetes, but with lifestyle changes, I have avoided diabetes. Other members of my family not so lucky, didn't make the lifestyle changes in some cases. So yeah, I think there is a lot of latitude in human nature.
Robert, I read a lot of interviews you've given, and I read one recently about you. Audible approached you to do your most recent book, The Downloaded, and I know that it comes out in print in May because the 6-month exclusive. Can't even say the word.
A 6-month exclusive window expires May.
Exclusive
It
window
actually expires in April,
May.
and then May we have the
Yes,
lovely
so
print edition. Here's the advanced reading copy
beautiful.
coming out. Yeah, there it is. The
Lovely.
Downloaded.
I wanted to ask you, let's start with what was the topic?
Oh, okay. So it's interesting because before we started recording, it was kind of being enumerated to me that my novels tie into the zeitgeist, and Elizabeth mentioned everything that I talked about in the book, or one of you had mentioned everything that I talk about in the book. And really, as I always say, science fiction is about the year in which it is written, not the year in which it is set. My classic example of that is the original 1968 Planet of the Apes. What's Planet of the Apes about? If you haven't watched it as an adult, go and watch it as an adult. Planet of the Apes is about the 2 front-page news stories of every newspaper almost every day in 1967 when the film was made, came out in February of 68. Race relations and the fear of nuclear war. Every scene in the movie is on one or the other of those 2 topics. What I was curious about, in particular, most importantly, the theme for the downloaded, was we were dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. We were dealing with a worldwide plague that had fundamentally changed human interaction. What we're doing right now, talking by video, is for the convenience of making a public video recording. But it also is the way you saw your best friend and your grandmother and your nieces and nephews, and for many, many people, their coworkers, for a period of a year or two or more. We, in essence, had uploaded. We had gone from living actual physical lives to virtual lives. And one of the things I say is a great story generating engine for science fiction is you take something that is metaphoric, like what I just said, that we'd uploaded, and treat it as a literal. Boom, you've got your science fiction plot. What if we really had uploaded with no end in sight to when we would be uploaded? You know, it's kind of uploaded with the intention that that's the new normal, and then suddenly are forced to download again. How do we go back to having human interactivity when, you know, it's one thing to go on Facebook and say, you're full of beans, you are an idiot. By God, if I was there, I'd bop you in the nose, and say that when the person is right there and he bops you in the nose first, right? So it was all about the zeitgeist. It was all about my metaphoric response to the COVID-19 fundamental change in the way humans were interacting.
Interesting. Okay. Did you want to go on from that, Elizabeth?
Oh, well, I was just wondering, what was it then about Oppenheimer that spurred you at that moment, since, you know, that's past, and the nuclear, I mean, it's always with us ever since it was invented, and it will probably always be with us. But what was it that made that prescient for you then?
My road to Oppenheimer was a little bit oblique. I'm a fan of live theater, and I take in, besides big, you know, Broadway productions, I also go to fringe theater shows. And a friend of mine in Montreal said, you know what the best show was this year at Montreal Fringe? It was a show called The Inventor of All Things, The Inventor of All Things, by Jem Rolls, Jem Rolls, like the Rolls Royce, Rolls. And I didn't get to see it, but it was about Leo Szilard. And I thought, I know that name. I've kind of heard that name around. I should start digging into it. And Leo Szilard was the one man who really did have a conscience and a change of heart during the Manhattan Project. He was the one who, yes, ghost wrote the letter that Einstein sent to FDR saying, we got to get a nuclear bomb before the Russians get it. And he's also the one who said, oh, no, you cannot drop it on a civilian population. You have to demonstrate it. Invite Japanese physicists to a neutral locale where nobody is going to get hurt. Let them bring any recording instruments, any sensors, let them do any examination they want of the bomb and watch it go off in an unoccupied desert and send them safely back to Hirohito. That's all that has to be done. And he fought and fought and fought for that. But peripherally, and the guy he ended up butting heads with and saying, no, we're going to do this thing, was certainly General Groves, but also J. Robert Oppenheimer. So I led to Oppie from Leo Szilard, and it was a tip from my friend Liz Sano, herself a very fine playwright in Montreal, who said, you got to check out Jem Rolls' play. I eventually saw that play of Jem's and a couple more by him. Jem became a friend. He blurbed the novel and read it in manuscript, gave me some advice and so forth. So yeah, but you're always listening as any kind of writer, not just a science fiction writer. I embarrass, my wife in restaurants because the couple behind will be having a fight and she's kind of cringing and I'm going, oh, that's pure gold. Oh, he said that, I can use that, right? You're a sponge, you're anything. When somebody says, oh, Leo Szilard, I don't know anything about Leo Szilard much. Turned out he was H.G. Wells's literary agent. Turned out he wrote science fiction, besides being the founder. The Doomsday Clock is from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Well, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is the truncated version of the full name. Full name was the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists of Chicago, meaning the Chicago Physics lab that Leo Szilard was one of the leading figures of. The conscience of nuclear Armageddon, of the nuclear age, started with that guy. But when somebody just, that's intriguing, I got to know more about this, and you just follow your nose as a writer, that's where the ideas come from.
Your wife is a writer too, correct?
She's a poet, very, very fine, widely published, award-winning poet. So it's a different kind of writing, and it makes our relationship very stable. I have seen and was on a panel some years ago with writing couples, probably 20 years ago. And the other two couples were both novelists, and they've both broken up because one of them had more success than the other. In my field and Carolyn's field, the metrics of success are so incredibly different. You know, as Carolyn likes to say, she's well into her Xth, 20th, or whatever it is, consecutive year of having a solid 3-digit income as a poet, right? And as I like to, you know, I mean, obviously my income is orders of magnitude more than that. The awards, the recognition, they're different. We have different scales that our art is appreciated on. You know, if a poetry chapbook sells 100 copies, the author is delighted. If one of my novels sold 100 copies, everybody would be furious. My agent, my publisher, me, we'd all be pretty upset.
Now, in one of your interviews, you were mentioning that you were trying to keep some of the rights, like your audio rights or things like that, not to give everything away to the publisher. When you worked with Audible, was it similar? Did they have the rights? Was it a similar thing of you keeping the rights?
So when I started, my first novel came out in 1990. All publishers wanted, the only thing they wanted was print publication rights. And then with the ebook revolution, they decided they also need the electronic text rights. Okay. They're not very good at selling ebooks. In fact, they're crappy at it. And indeed, they overprice them deliberately to try and protect their legacy marketplace of paper-bound books. But then something happened, Audible being a huge player in this. It used to be that only audio books made were really butchered abridgments of the biggest bestsellers. Why? Because the physical medium was so expensive, cassette tapes. The Oppenheimer alternative, for example, is about 12 hours of audio tape. All right, so on C60 cassettes, that is 60 minutes per cassette. That's 12 cassettes. The physical cost of producing it as an audiobook is untenable. So it never would have been produced as an audiobook. But then Audible came along, and you've noted that abridged audiobooks have disappeared. Bandwidth is no problem. People now do, almost every book now is done as an audiobook. Well, the print publishers said, well, we want those rights too. So they started with print, and then they want ebook, and then they want audiobook, and the advances went nowhere. They didn't go up 1 penny, not 1 cent. Indeed, advances have trended down over that time period. So they wanted more rights for less money. And Amazon, when I self-publish a book, I kept the ebook rights and the worldwide print rights for the downloaded. So when I self-publish the downloaded ebook, I get 70% of whatever you pay. That's 70% of the net. The net is what the gross. 70% of the gross is the net, which is what you pay. 30% is skimmed off by Amazon or Apple or Kobo or whoever, Nook, whoever your ebook provider is. Do the same thing with one of my Tor titles, Penguin, Random House, or Ace titles. That same 70% is paid out, but they take 3/4 of it, leaving me with 1/4 of 70%. You can do the math, I'll tell you for you. That's 17.5%. So I get 17.5% ebook royalties from a big pie publisher, or 70%, 4 times as much from a traditional publisher. From self-publishing. So yes, I am adamant that these guys are rapacious, that they take rights that they don't know how to effectively exploit, or that they indeed deliberately undermine the exploitation of, in the case of ebook rights, to protect their traditional model, and say, no, I'm not going to do business with those guys anymore. And in fact, I'm not. With the Oppenheimer alternative was my first time where I said, screw this. I'm going to go into the marketplace and offer only the print rights. I ended up with a smaller publisher, but I ended up making more money in the long run by vending separately the audio and separately the ebook rights. And I'll make an Audible, who has no interest in print rights, but nonetheless really wanted me on their slate, paid me a very large amount of money. You know, I said no additional advance if I give my audio book rights to a Big Five New York publisher. And Audible paid as much as a Big Five New York publisher would pay for the print rights to just have the Audible rights. And I still had those print rights and the ebook rights. So yes, the traditional publishing model, which is big publishing takes as many rights as they can and badly administers most of them, is, I think, untenable and certainly not something that authors should just blithely agree to, because the publisher will always say, oh, standard, that's boilerplate. Everybody signs this.
Right.
Everybody does not.
So
when you went to, one more question, Elizabeth. When you went into the Audible and wrote the book for Audible, did you do it thinking, okay, this is a book, this is going to start as a voice piece, so I want to approach it like a series of monologues, or since it's first person, bunch of characters?
So interesting that you should ask that, because it evolved. My first thought was, of course, I'm going to write this in a way that it'll also play really well as a print book and an ebook. And it does. It absolutely does. But initially, Audible wanted to do essentially, you know, full-blown radio drama. And I've written radio drama for the CBC, which used to do radio drama and doesn't do it anymore. Very few people do it anymore. The BBC still does some. And we were all set to do that. And then the producers, or sorry, the people at Audible, the executives at Audible, called up the director and me and said, flag on the play. Our COVID safety experts are saying we can't get more than one actor into studio at a time. And in fact, you, the director, pointing at Greg Sinclair, who directed it very, very effectively. Greg, you can't be in the studio. You got to zoom in. The only person whose life we're going to put on at risk is the audio technician. No offense to the one who is being our audio technician right now, but they're expendable, right? So those are the only two people in the studio. Greg and I zoomed in. We were there for the recording sessions, but there in the uploaded sense, not in the downloaded sense. But it changed everything. And I was kind of stumped. I thought, how am I going to do this? And it was actually Greg who said, I've got one word for you, Rob, Rashomon. What is Rashomon? Rashomon is a Kurosawa film based on two Japanese short stories. One is called Rashomon. The other one that the film is more closely based on is called In a Grove. And I had never, to my shame, seen the Kurosawa film, but I was familiar with the trope, which is that it's multiple first-person testimonies to a judge describing a crime, in this case, the horrible crime of rape, a crime from the point of view of various witnesses, accused, victim, all kinds of people who had different things to say about it. And then I went and read the short stories that it was based on and also saw the film and decided that's perfect. And that was where it fell into be a series 9, in fact, different first-person narratives that overlap and contradict about the events that make up the story of the downloaded. And it worked chef's kiss perfectly, but it never would have been planned that way if it hadn't been for this COVID restriction that was put upon us and everybody else in the entertainment industry. We were at least ahead. And let me finish. We were able to go ahead. And of course, we were able to get Brendan Fraser and Luke Kirby, who couldn't work because another circumstance hit, the actors' strike. So A, they couldn't work under things that were under their union jurisdiction and audiobooks aren't. And B, they couldn't, films couldn't be made anyways or TV because of the COVID restrictions. So that perfect storm of really awful things. The strike was great in terms of its outcome, and I was on strike in that jurisdiction. I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America. But those awful circumstances that, in terms of getting things done, turned out to be the unique set of ingredients that made the downloaded happen.
The umami of it all, if you want.
Were you involved in the casting at all?
So yes, Greg and I were asked, who do we want? And Greg was one of the principal producers of radio drama at the CBC, and also an artistic, an executive for one of Toronto's best theater companies, Soul Pepper. One word, Soul Pepper. So he knew just about everybody. And because it was actually the Canadian office of Audible, which is in New Jersey, that commissioned, that downloaded, Greg and I were naturally predisposed to Canadian actors. So it was Greg who said, let's get Brendan Fraser for Roscoe Cadoolian. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That's great. And then just a year ago this month, we're talking in January 2024, January 2023, we'd put this name out there. And then Brendan went and won the Academy Award for Best Actor, Best Lead Actor for The Whale. And we said, all right, what's the B list? What's the who, and we went to Audible and said, okay, here are the other ideas. They're not our first choice, but we understand. They said, what are you talking about? So he just won the Academy Award. His price just went through the ceiling. They go, fortunately, you know who owns Audible? It's Amazon. Our pockets are as long as the Amazon River is deep or wide or long or whatever. As deep as the Amazon is long. And they did it. They got whoever we asked for.
Wow.
Whoever we asked for.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a hard experience.
I would work with them again in a heartbeat. I've been published by 4 of the big 5 New York publishing houses, as well as the biggest publishing house in Canada, and their UK counterparts and so forth. I've never had a creative partnership that has been more supportive, creatively, financially. We trust you. We believe in your vision. Do it your way. Do it what you want to do. You tell us what you need. We'll make it happen. And it did. I have nothing but praise for Audible. And for, in particular, Jaleesa Beaton, who was the executive in charge of our project for Audible Canada at the Audible office in New Jersey. But she's a good Canadian woman. She happens to work in New Jersey. It's like Captain Kirk, right? Captain Kirk says, when he's asked if he's from outer space, no, I only work in outer space. I'm from Iowa.
So is that on your list to do another one like that?
I have, yes, Audible has, option, any contract for publishing, film, television, usually has an option clause, which says basically, we have the right to be the first person to look at your next property. And you're not locked into us, but we have the right to look at it and negotiate with you. So I, earlier this month, put in a detailed proposal for the next thing I want to do for Audible. And at the same time, we had a conversation about a sequel to The Downloaded, because many of the Audible customers in their customer reviews have said, I'd love to see a sequel. Where's part 2? I want to know more. These characters are great. Tell me. I'm not normally inclined to write sequels. It's not my normal template. But what the heck? I love doing the project and I know what the sequel would be. So I'm also putting together notes towards a sequel.
So when you go for your next audio book, are you also going to say, oh, well, the first person monologue works so well, I'm going to keep with that? Or are you going to just...
No, I don't think so. I started writing it. I started playing around with The Downloaded on the assumption that COVID, because I've been thinking about the idea for a while. Domesticus, which is the title of the next project. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I started writing it that way. And then, no, the stricture doesn't exist anymore. And it's much more dramatic for an actor to play off another actor. I was just actually looking back on a comment I made about Star Trek, the animated series, which had problems. I don't know if any of you remember 1973-74. There was briefly an animated version of Star Trek, half hour, all the original cast. But except for the first couple of episodes, the major actors were not in studio together. William Shatner would be off, making a made-for-TV movie. Nimoy was in New York doing a play on Broadway, blah, blah, blah. So they all went to separate recording studios, recorded their lines in isolation, and then some poor sap had to splice it all together at Filmation, the animation studio. It's lifeless. The performances never leap off the page because the actors aren't playing against other actors. It's so much easier and better to do Whether you're writing dialogue in a novel, you very rarely see a novel that's just told as monologues. It almost always, even in a first-person novel, such as, say, My Calculating God, the scenes with other characters are done as interactive back and forth dialogue. The thrust and parry of human interaction is what makes for vibrant fiction.
So I have another question now you just made me think of. So you start from topic, you go to theme, you start doing the research. When does it, like, I'm going to do a first person, or does that just happen as you're doing it?
It's a hugely significant choice. So it really behooves you to give thought. Now, that said, the default format for almost all 20th and most so far 21st century fictions, particularly commercial fiction, has been third person limited narration. Third person, he, she, they, it, did this, that, in the past tense, did not do. And limited meaning, despite the fact that it's he walked into the room, if he is the viewpoint character, he walked into the room and saw her on the other side of the room. He wondered whether she had figured out that he was actually a secret agent for the federal government. But looking at her face, all he could see was inscrutable expression. In other words, he never gets into the other head. There's no head hopping. That's limited third person. It's the default. It serves most stories very well. If you're going to make a choice to deviate from the default, then it should be a reasoned, considered choice. Reason you might want to do it is there's some things that just are much more natural, as said, I did this, I did that. But you know what? Action adventure doesn't work very well like that. I walked into the room. There were 20 other guys there. All of them were bigger than me. And with a sucker punch, I took out the first one. And then with my patented kung fu maneuver, I took out the second one. And the third one, I outsmarted him at a game of chess. And when he wasn't looking, slipped him, some cyanide when he had his little glass. No, you sound like you're bragging. It's all braggadocio. If it's done in first person, whereas if it's done in third person, oh, wow, this guy is really impressive, right? Everybody's impressive when somebody is dispassionately recounting their feats. Nobody's impressive when they're saying, yeah, I went in there, I told the boss, I'm not going to stand for that, honey. I told him, give me a raise. How much did you get? I told him. You didn't get a thing, did you? I went in there. Right? It doesn't play in first person. So it has to be a good reason for it. And a good reason certainly is if the first person has a narrative voice, a very distinctive way of talking, of speaking, of expressing themselves. And also for lots and lots of unspoken thoughts that are snarky asides. So I have a great fondness for noir detective fiction, for instance. And Robert B. Parker was the great late 20th, until maybe the beginning of the 21st century, master of that. He had done his PhD thesis on noir fiction, studied Hammond, had studied Chandler, knew every trope, knew everything to do. He created Spencer, who has been played by various actors, most notably Robert Ulrich on TV. But in the Spencer novels, they're all first person, because half of the joy of those books is the snarky thoughts that Spencer has. Yes, he will put people down with the really well-phrased insult, but he also will be thinking all the things that he doesn't say, and that works really well as first person narration. But you have to have a justification for any choice you make as a writer to deviate from the norm, except one. This is the one I'm passionate about. People say, your characters are all not, they don't say this to me. They've never said this to me, because it's unassailably true that my work is diverse in all aspects and always has been. But other people say, they're fictional. All your characters are white, Western people, Christian. You go, they are, right? Kind of the default. There's no default human being. And certainly of the 8 billion human beings on this planet, that person I described, the white, male, Western Christian, is by no means the default human being. I got into a fight in Hollywood once. I was working with an Academy Award-winning screenwriter on adapting one of my books. And it was Triggers. And in the book, there's a character who's a Sikh. And he said, why is he a Sikh? I said, there are lots of Sikhs. Why wouldn't he be a Sikh? So well, what's the dramatic purpose of him being a Sikh? What would be the dramatic purpose of him being a white guy or you know, a Jew or a Buddhist or any number of other, or a person of no faith at all? There's no need for a dramatic purpose for diversity. Diversity is a celebration of humanity. So in that sense, nobody should ever fall back. Well, the default is, or, you know, the default reader of science fiction is, you know, a kind of geeky white guy. So no point in shaking up that guy's worldview with some non-geeky, non-white, non-guy characters. No, 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 no. Your job is to challenge. And one of the many ways you challenge is making sure that people have to face up to the diversity that's in fiction. And none of this namby-pamby crap about hinting that the person might have dark skin without ever saying it, for instance. In a movie, the frame, the instant the black character appears on frame, you know he's black. The director doesn't do it in shadow and think there's going to be a suggestion that somehow you're going to pick up that the actor is African-American. No, it's blatantly obvious in film and in live theater and music videos, the ethnicity of the performer, the character. Why in books we're afraid to say, Peter Hobson, a white man, walked into the room and there was his Muslim friend, Sarkar Muhammad. You know, why can't we say that? And so, oh, he said that character was white. He said that character was brown skinned. Why did he have to mention their race? Because it would be blindingly obvious to any person in the scene. If a detective were to ask you in real life, what was the skin color? What were the ethnicities of the people who you saw in that robbery situation? You said, I don't see color. He'd haul you off to the station house and beat you with the rubber hose in the back room because it is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Your job is to reflect reality as it really is. But don't just say, oh, a black person entered, and never say anybody was white, because then what you're doing is falling back in that trap and saying, oh, well, the default color is white. You don't mention anything unless it deviates from the default. Black is the deviation. Ask any black guy you know if he thinks or she thinks or they think they are the deviation. They're the norm in their world, as blatantly they should be. There is no default human condition. You shouldn't be afraid to describe or include the whole panoply of humanity, and you shouldn't be afraid to say, just flat out, yeah, here's a black guy, here's a white guy, here's an Asian guy. They're all friends. A black guy, a white guy, and an Asian guy walk into a bar. Each one buys a round. They go home happier than they were before. That is what should be the story of the human race.
I loved your, I didn't quite get it written down correctly, but you said diversity is celebration of humanity? Something
Celebration
close.
of the panoply of humanity, the variety of
And I
humanity.
love that.
It
It's
is.
beautiful. I love that.
Right?
That's a
There
beautiful
is
thought.
no default human being.
When you're writing, do you plan that though? Do you plan the diversity, or does that just happen in your writing?
You know, I grew up in Toronto, which UNESCO has named the most multicultural city on the planet. And it really is. I live in a very nice apartment building, but white Western Europeans, which is what my ancestry happens to be, are the minority in my building. My neighbors are wonderful, lovely people. It is just the milieu in which I was brought up. When I was 10 years old, Expo 67 had been in Montreal. Expo 70 was in Osaka, Japan. Canada had a presence at the opening ceremonies and at the World's Fair. And our presence at the opening ceremonies was a whole bunch of Canadian women dancing. They were all identical. They were all white-skinned, blue-eyed brunettes. And I said to my parents, 10 years old, what the hell is that? That's not Canada. But that was our federal government's vision of Canada in 1970. We've come a long way, but I grew up watching Star Trek. I grew up with the bridge of the Enterprise being, if not the future, what the future should be. I got into an argument recently with somebody who said, you know, Planet of the Apes, 1968, hasn't aged very well. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now there's a film that's aged. And I said, oh, Where's the person of color? Any person of color in that film? Where is a woman who has anything but a subservient role? Oh, yeah, the Russian woman. Well, that was Russian women in 1968 when the film came out. None of the American women in the film do. You get a babysitter, you get a stewardess, you get hostesses, you get not a single one of the 5 astronauts, nobody of color. And, this is astonishing to me, the short-sightedness, especially Stanley Kubrick's immediately preceding film was Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove was the first acting credit of James Earl Jones. In that film, he put a black man on board the B-52 bomber that is central to the plot, and it doesn't figure at all in the plot that he's a black man. It's just there's diversity. I don't know what happened to Kubrick between 64 and 68 that made him lose all sight. I say science fiction about the year to which it was written, not 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was about some antiseptic 20 to 30 year out of date at the time version of gender roles and human diversity. To me, it's a beautiful looking film, but it hasn't aged well at all in terms of its social extrapolation. Whereas, sad to say, all of that stuff about race relations and the fear of nuclear war is as germane today in 2024 as it was in 1968 when the original Planet of the Apes came out.
So do you think we'll ever get beyond the nuclear threat?
I so wish. I was listening to a commentator, I can't remember who it was, a couple of weeks ago, who said, you know what? For the first time in history, 2 different nuclear powers are actively involved in war. That's right. They're not at war with each other currently, Russia and Israel, but we have 2 nuclear powers fighting wars right now. Plus, we have a madman in North Korea. Plus, we have Donald Trump, who doesn't seem to be afraid to threaten to use nukes. Out of the Manhattan Project, there came a report that was entitled One World or None. And it was an advocacy for a world government that would have the sole control over atomic energy. We never got that. And instead of in 1945, there being 1 nuclear power, and then some years later, thanks to espionage, there being 2, the Soviet Union, and now a huge number, plus all of those who got nuclear bombs when the Soviet Union fell and bombs went unaccounted for. We honestly don't know what countries or terrorist groups are nuclear powers now, because there are unaccounted for lost nukes from the fall of the Soviet Union, when it just all collapsed and the silos were left unattended. So will we put the nuclear genie back in the bottle? I'm very, very concerned that the AI crisis and the climate crisis, that we've got 3 existential threats, and only one of them has to succeed in being an actual existential threat to cause our extinction.
I would like to hear your thoughts on AI. I know that's broad, but
yeah. So AI, it's like the nuclear weapons. It's like what I said. We didn't have to make AI. There are people who wanted it and thought there's a buck to be made, but nobody who had wanted it for the buck knew how to make it. The people who went out and made it did it because they thought they could make a lot of money off of it. But was it a good idea? We're seeing right now, a friend of mine, Lazarus Turnick, just posted on my Facebook wall today how his creative spirit and reason for living has disappeared because he's a visual artist. And people now can go and ask any DALL-E or any of the other visual generative AIs to make any art they want for free. Why would you pay him? His career is, over. Mine isn't quite over yet, but will be. You'll say, I really love Rob Sawyer, but you know what? I really prefer his outer space books. But man, that guy has a tendency to bash America and put in bad puns. Let's get a Rob Sawyer book that's in outer space, leave off the America bashing, and, no bad puns. Get rid of those. 10 minutes later, that book is on your Kindle. I didn't write it. I don't get a penny for it. you're the only person in the world who wants to read it. Because I don't bash America. I'm a dual US Canadian citizen. I'm a concerned and engaged American who speaks up when I see injustice. That's not bashing America. But when you ask for that and you get it, it becomes the era of bespoke fiction. You know, whatever you want. Nobody else may want it. It doesn't matter. And the person like me who depends, remember I talked about those metrics of success. I can't live if one person wants to read my book, or 10 or 100 or 1,000. I need 10,000, 100,000. I need an audience worldwide, cumulatively of millions, to make a living doing this. And AI, no, we're not going to have that. Oh, you know, even just entry-level jobs. I was talking to a Chinese writer who was absolutely spot on when I was guest of honor at Chengdu Worldcon. He said, you know what's been eliminated is beginners' jobs. No more first job at McDonald's. It's being replaced by machines. No more first job at a checkout. No more first job as a bank teller. No more first job as a security guard. They're all, you know, that's all replaced by AI surveillance. It's all those jobs are gone. So yes, we say, oh yeah, AI is only doing the low-level jobs, but you can't plug people who don't have experience first at low-level jobs into high-level jobs. So just some billionaires decided there was a little more money to be wrung out before the nuclear apocalypse by destroying whole swaths of human endeavor for profit. That's my thought. And science fiction warned us about it for 70 plus years. That's why I say we science fiction writers are enormously frustrated, because we thought we were prophets, not making a big profit, but we thought we were prophets. We turned out we're Cassandras. Cassandra was the character from Greek mythology who was cursed with absolutely being able to foretell the future, and nobody would believe her. That's where we are today with AI. I didn't know it was going to be like this. Well, you're an idiot because you were warned.
Well, climate change too, from way back.
Climate change too, absolutely. As I said to somebody just yesterday, you know, Greta Thunberg, I love her. She's wonderful. She's supposedly the future. But what did we get? COP28. We got, or COP26. We got the most recent climate summit in Dubai, in an oil-producing country, where they said, well, the science isn't clear. We don't know. We don't, you know, 1.5 Celsius cap or pre-industrial. Oh, come on, let's be realistic. That will interfere with making money. And so we're just going to not do it. We're not going to, you know, we could have solved climate change. Would have been easy, like all these things. Like we in the downloaded, one of the threats is an incoming asteroid. You detect it early, takes a little bit to deflect it because it only just has to miss Earth by just a little bit, and you're fine. Gets close to Earth because we debate it. I don't know if it's really coming. I don't know if we want to spend $1 trillion to deflect it. Oh, now it's so close. Guess what? Now we can't deflect that. We don't even, with all of that nuclear arsenal we've got, it's still too close. Or we're going to blow it up into fragments, and it's just going to destroy the entire planet in, 10,000 impacts instead of one big one. So yeah, science fiction is supposed to be the literature that warns us about the second and third order effects of new technologies. Anybody could have predicted, this is a famous saying about science fiction, anybody could have predicted, the automobile. But who would have predicted that the leading cause of death of men under 25 in North America until the recent drug crisis would be death by automobile? Who would have predicted, that we would have automobiles for almost a half century before we decided, maybe we should have seatbelts. Maybe actually we could put some restraining technology in. Who would predict, anybody well before the Wright brothers could have predicted powered flight? Who would have predicted frequent flyer miles and airport lounges? Well, the science fiction writers, that's our job, to say this is where it will lead 2, 3, 4 steps down the road. And we did that with the environment. We did that with AI. We did that with every technology. And people said, there, you go back to your pulp literature. We're going to just do what the heck we want to do. And that's why we're in the mess we're in today.
True, though even
we're banning books, for God's sakes. Orwell and Bradbury warned us over and over again about this. And, I was, as I said, just a guest of honor along with my friend Cixin Liu. We were the co-guests of honor at Chengdu Worldcon. And I was constantly asked, what's the difference between the West and the East? What's the difference between China and the United States? Easy. In the United States, you have censorship and you hate it. And it comes from the government. There's not a damn thing you can do about it. The United States, they have censorship and they love it. And it comes from the grassroots and they force it onto school boards and onto universities and onto politicians. And they cancel anybody they don't like. And they do it because it's the grassroots up. So what's the difference? The difference is you live in a censorship environment that you hate and can't do anything about. They, us, live in a censorship environment that we have created and let grow and grow and grow in its power. That's the difference. They have no choice, can't do anything about it. We have a choice and chose not to do anything about it.
In Utah, the school board just banned the Bible, which I think
unbelievable, right?
I
Now there's a lot of crap in the Bible, I gotta say, right?
Exactly.
I love the scene from The West Wing. One of my favorite shows is my friend Michael Okuda, who was a scenic art director on Star Trek, said The West Wing was the greatest Star Trek series that didn't have Star Trek in its title, because it's all about idealists trying to promulgate idealistic ideas and be effectual about them. But there's a great scene in the West Wing, where Martin Sheen, who was president in the United States, meets a religious fundamentalist who wants, I forget what she's on about, ban this, ban that, at the other thing. And he just takes her through the list of all the things that she's ignored in the Bible that are, he said, oh, my chief of staff is working on the Sabbath. Now, do I have to put him to death personally, or can I assign one of my employees to put him to death? My daughter is now at the age that I should sell her, but tell me, what's the current going rate? Right? The Bible is full of noxious, horrible stuff and a little bit of good stuff. What we have now is people cherry picking. It's like, Forrest Gump says, life is a box of chocolates, right? And they're trying the ones that you would normally on. You want to put that one back? Oh, this one is truly noxious. Let's have a whole box of these noxious ones. And the good ones, the ones that have the cherry in the middle or have the caramel or whatever your favorite happens to be, no, those ones we're going to throw out. So, yeah, but the banning of books, my God, if you allow and it's on the left and the right, if you allow the banning of anything that discusses slavery, which is something that a lot of people have been pushing for, right? Don't bring it up. Don't remind people. You got to ban the amendments to the Constitution. You've got to ban the Constitution of the United States because a number of the amendments deal specifically with that. Can't mention that. Of course, you got to mention it. You have to. It's unbelievable to me right now that there's that the number 2 party in Germany, that may be the number 1 party shortly, is a far right anti-immigrant party. Did they learn nothing about being slapped down by the entire world the last time they tried to pull that garbage? No, apparently not, because they don't read their own history.
But you say people can change.
Yes, that's the only hope, is that they can change. Now, it's often a one-on-one that, one person manages to change another person's mind. I have a great friend who, in the Canadian province of Alberta, an election was coming up, and I said, are you voting for we're honest in our party names. We have the Liberals and the Conservatives, and that's exactly what they are. They don't Democrat, Republican, no, they're liberal, conservative. And they don't flip-flop. There was no time where the Liberal Party, like the Democrats used to be where the Republicans are now, and blah, blah, blah. They flip. None of that happened in Canada. So are you voting Liberal? Oh, I vote Conservative. Why? I've always voted Conservative. Why? My parents always voted Conservative. Okay, here are the things that are in the Conservative platform. We're going to cut back the progress that's been made in LGBTQ rights. We have marriage equity in Canada. Anybody can marry anybody. That's going to be eliminated. Is this the Conservative platform? Yeah, it is. Honestly, let's have a look. And so on and so forth, down the litany of things. And this now, here are the things that are in the Liberal platform. I'm a liberal. I never knew I was a liberal. I voted, So you do it, but it's an enormous effort. And to turn the tide, what's astonishing in the United States, you couldn't devise a case study, an experiment for a sociology class any better than the American experiment right now, where you have two diametrically opposed parties that have almost exactly equal number of members. In Canada, we have, our conservatives and liberals, but we also have our Socialist Party. We have a splintered Conservative Party. We have a Green Party. We have all these parties, and coalitions are the only way governments generally function. We do occasionally have a majority from one party or another, but generally speaking, coalitions in Europe operates much the same way. The American reality right now is like, if you had written that into a screenplay and handed it to the founding fathers and say, it's going to be a deadlock between people who believe in this and people who believe in that forever, they would say, come on, that's pure fantasy. And then it turned out to be reality. Immutable reality, because it's only that tiny little swath down the middle that seems to be willing to change. So it's a fight. But I don't know, I am, as I say, the events of the last 4 years, politically, the plague, environmentally, have made me much less optimistic than I was when I started writing and came to the conclusion way back in 2013, 11 years ago, when I was working on Quantum Right, that you could change human nature.
So would you write a different book now that you can't change your
Nope.
nature?
I would never. In fact, I get at now I've got the rights to many of my books back, and I'm in a position to reissue them, revise them. Some of my writer friends have been doing that. Nope. They are, as I say, every science fiction novel about the year in which it was written. And it's also any book, any work of art is about you at the age and life circumstances you were at that time. You look at so many artists who start poor and end up insanely rich. And their most powerful work is when life was hard scrabble for them. And you go back when, I don't have to worry about money anymore. I never have to worry about a roof over my head. Nobody's going to beat me up. I've got everything I want. And then you go back and you try and find that pain that made you write the stuff that you wrote when you were young. Revise it? To revise it would be to sanitize it, to remove that. No, I don't think once, it's an interesting issue. We talk about AI and copyright. One of the principles of what works are eligible for copyright, a work is eligible for copyright when it is fixed in a permanent form. That's the word of the wording in the Copyright Act. Until, if it's just a draft, if it's malleable, if it's changeable, a piece of clay, you can't copyright the clay on your potter's wheel. You can only copyright the thing once you've fired it in the kiln. In essence, that's a metaphor. And the same thing is with any literary work. When it's fixed in a permanent form, that's when it's done. I'm not going to go back and revise any of my stuff, except, as I've said to my Patreons recently, I had 2 books where I didn't fight hard enough with an editor who made egregiously bad suggestions. I capitulated. I've regretted it for an awfully long time, and I'm going to rectify that when the author's preferred editions come in.
Nice.
Great.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's really, really been a delight. And we usually end every show with the best thing you learned this week. So,
what's the best thing I learned this week?
Or interesting, or it doesn't have to be best.
So that's fascinating. I learn so much every day. I'm trying to think of what would stand out as something really good and exciting that I learned this week. I learned, it's interesting. I've been watching For All Mankind. I'm just on the first season. And of course, in the first episode of For All Mankind, Deke Slayton, who was a real Mercury 7 astronaut who, because of medical problems, never got to fly when he was young on Mercury, became a head of the astronaut program. And he had to watch in the alternate history For All Mankind, where Alexei Leonov became the first person to set foot on the moon instead of Neil Armstrong. Leonov was a real Russian cosmonaut. I had the great pleasure of meeting Alexei at a conference we were both speaking at in Tenerife. The reality is Deke finally did get to go up for the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And who did he shake hands with? Who was the astronaut that he went up with? The cosmonaut on the other side of that handshake, Alexei Leonov. So I love the fact that in real life, they ended up being great friends rather than in this militaristic version of the space program that For All Mankind is making as a very compelling entertainment right now. I love the fact that in reality, these two guys actually shook hands and probably for the first time in Earth orbit.
Well, that's great. I like that one too. So mine was that legumes give off biophotons, and they're thinking that it might actually be a way they're communicating. So I read that in New Scientist, and there's a bunch of scientific articles, and that was my favorite.
You ask any science fiction writer, what is their #1 magazine they subscribe to? It's New Scientist. It is just page after page. It used to have a slogan on the front cover, the week's best ideas. They dropped that. It was a good slogan. They should have kept it, because page after page of this is cutting edge. This is what this suggests. It is the best fodder. British publication, New Scientist, but indispensable for the science fiction writers. I'm very pleased to hear you say that.
Very cool. Mine is just that they have discovered that the toxic red mud that comes as a byproduct from making aluminum, now they're creating a way, the French, Institut Jean Lemur is creating a way to pull iron out of it and reuse and hopefully use it for building projects, and also neutralize the slag that will also be used in building products, so they can get rid of some waste.
Excellent.
Which is
good
excellent.
news all around.
All around. We look for a little happiness at the end of our.
We have to. We have to.
We have to. So
All
thank
right,
you
my friends.
so much.
Live long and prosper.
Thank you. Live long and
And
prosper.
you. Thank you so much. This was
My absolute
amazing.
pleasure.
Thank you, Robert.